I'm Tony Perkins, and this is Washington Watch, the website, tonyperkins.com. If you're on Parler, it's at T. Perkins. Again, let me remind you, join me tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann will be with me, Eric McTaxis, and Georgia Congressman Jody Heiss. Pray Vote Stand, prayvotestand.org at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, yesterday on Capitol Hill, an explosive hearing, an insightful hearing. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey were the usual suspects at the big tech hearing. The Senate Judiciary Committee had a multitude of questions for the social media giants, and quite frankly, I think their answers raised more questions. One of the questions is there collusion between the big tech giants to kind of censor conservatives? Here's what Josh Hawley had to say yesterday.
In the late 19th century, the heads of the biggest corporations in America, the robber barons, got together and they set rates, they set prices, they determined how they would control information flow, they determined how they get rid of competition. And I'll be darned if we aren't right back there again. Except for this time, you're the robber barons. Your companies are the most powerful companies in the world. And I want to talk about how you're coordinating together to control information.
Well, joining me now to talk about what came forward in yesterday's hearing is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who chaired yesterday's hearing, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you. It was fascinating to sit there, and I did have more questions than answers.
Well, so are they the new robber barons?
Well, they have control over information flow unlike any group in the history of the world. They're a television station, they're a radio station, they're a publisher. They're all these things combined because we, the public, use their services. And here's the question. At what point is it in the public interest to allow folks to sue when they feel like they're wronged, which you can't do today, or provide regulation over how they engage in business? They're the only people I know of, Tony, that can't be sued and live under no regulatory scheme. Now, your program is licensed by the government. You buy Spectrum, you have rules of the road. If you slander somebody on your program, they can sue the station, not just you. On social media outlets, you have no recourse. If they take your content down because they don't like your post or don't like your Facebook video, you have no recourse against them. And all these things need to be on the table.
They do. But you put something else on the table which I found intriguing as I watched the hearing. And it's one that I've actually had experience in as a legislator on another subject matter, but it was the addiction of social media. Yeah. I dealt with addiction of gambling as a legislator in Louisiana, and there is a science behind that draws people in, and it is a public health issue. I thought it was very interesting that you brought that point forward about social media.
Okay, so big tobacco. During World War II, the government would provide cigarettes to the troops because it was a socially accepted, product. And we learned later on that the tobacco companies understood it was addictive and had health hazards associated with it, and so thus we now regulate tobacco. My question is, do the social media outlets, do they have the ability to make their product addictive? And the answer is yes. If you've seen the movie Social Dilemma, it's a pretty good expose about how they can manipulate getting you to go back to your phone and go back to these sites. And the question was, do you believe that your product, Facebook and others, has an addictive element? All the medical research seems to suggest that particularly for younger people, it becomes very addictive and very destructive. So I'm going to continue to pursue this line of thinking as to whether or not we need to regulate these social media outlets from a public health point of view and their business practices.
Well, when you combine the two issues that you were focusing on yesterday in the hearing, if there's an addictive nature where you draw people in and this becomes the source of their information, and then you control what information you allow in and what viewpoints you allow them to see, that is, borrowing from Senator Cruz's comments yesterday, that's a recipe for a totalitarian regime.
Yeah, I think so. And when you look at it this way, number one, you have a Twitter site probably, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you've let Twitter, but you have a Facebook page. These technologies have enriched our lives in many ways, but there's the dark side of it. There's the addictive nature of it. Sexual predators are out there all over social media, and we have a bill called the Earn It Act, where you take away Section 230 liability protections against social media outlets unless they harden their sites against child exploitation, sexual exploitation. In other words, they have to earn their protection. We have the same concept for terrorism. Terrorists use these media sites to incite others to their cause. So what I'm looking at is trying to come up with best business practices. What should social media outlets be doing in terms of making it less addictive? How do they control the flow of terrorism and child sexual exploitation? What kind of oversight do we have regarding who they put down and take up when it comes to content? And come up with a system, maybe self-regulated with government auditing. I don't want the government to pick and choose what we say, but these companies have the power of government in many ways, and something's got to give.
Right. I mean, I'm not, and I know you're in the same position, and most of the Republicans on the committee, same position. You know, we're not for big government overreach. Right. I mean, we're not for, I'm not a big fan of having every fast food restaurant you go into, the calories next to the big double Mac cheeseburger or whatever it is. You know, right. I'd rather not know how many calories I'm going to consume. Or the mayor of New York telling you can only have a drink of 16 ounces, not 32 ounces, you know. But we're talking about something I think long-term is not only, as you've pointed out, with the addiction aspects of this, it is causing mental illness, according to researchers, in young people. So you've got a health component here, but then you have an information component that long-term does tremendous damage to our republic and to the education of our citizens. When you look at where people get their news, more and more people are turning to social media sites like Facebook. They don't tune in to the nightly news and other traditional sources like newspapers are dying, right? So when a social media site puts a flag on your post or takes down your video or, censors what you have to say, then that's an editorial decision like a paper. Like the New York Post decided to print an expose about Hunter Biden's relationship in the Ukraine. Well, both Twitter and Facebook decided to stop dissemination of those articles. So if that's not editorial control, I don't know what would be. So should they be treated like a publisher, like an editor? Should they have a regulatory scheme? Because the key word here is manipulation. It's one thing for you to go in and buy a big gulp, if that's what you want to do. It's another thing for a company to be able to manipulate the content of what you see, how you see it, when you see it, and to use their product to get you to see it in a way you don't realize you're being manipulated. Right. So this is the world in which we live in children. Your program focuses on the family. Let me tell you, social media can enrich the family. It can be the darkest force for your children, and we've got to get a grip on it. You're absolutely right. Technology is a great thing, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. It can be an evil thing in the hands of the wrong person. Television is the same way. Television was a great invention. Exactly. Quite frankly, I think it's the worst thing on earth right now, just because of, look, I think it's dumbed down our society because it's spoon-fed people information, and just as social media is doing, I think it is altering reality for people because it is only allowing them to see the perspective that these big tech liberal giants want them to see. Well, particularly when you're in your formative years. The influence of the parent and of the church and other institutions, you're in competition, right? Mm-hmm. Every parent's in competition with the attention of your child, with the school, with the peers, with now social media. Right. And we need to level that playing field. Because they have a lot of influence over what you see and when you see it and how to think about things, Google particularly. And it's the challenge of, I think, my political generation is to come up with a way to control this before we lose control. But the first step is, number one, uncovering what is actually taking place, and that is a part of what these hearings were doing. Let me just ask you this question. Is there any question that these big tech giants, talking about Twitter, and Facebook are engaging in censorship. Is there any question that they're doing that?
Well, there's no doubt that,
Yeah.
I mean, they will say that they're flagging content. This is not true. This is, our fact checkers say it's not true. They'll take down a post because they think, here's the question. This posting violates our community standards. This posting failed our fact check. Well, here's the question. Who sets your community
Right.
standards, and who does the fact checking? So the question for all of us is, do we feel like the community standards they're using represents our community? And that's why I want to know more about what community standards mean and who does the fact checking.
So based on what you've seen, what you've heard in your committee, is there any question that this censorship has a bias against conservative viewpoints?
No question that, where are all these companies located? Okay, they're located in California. 99% of their political givings to Democrats. The Democrats, here's the odd thing about the hearing, they wanted them to do more. They
Of course.
wanted them to take more content down, and Republicans were worried about them having power over content. So you had Democrats very upset with them for a completely different reason, that they weren't doing enough to deal with what they consider hate speech. And our concern was that they're using community standards and fact-checking in a liberal biased way that we don't get a fair shake. Now, what would fix all this? If you could sue, if they took your content down, they would think twice about taking it down. If you could create a system where you gave them guidance, and if they ran afoul of the guidance, you could sue, that would change your behavior. There's two things I've learned as a lawyer and as a politician. If people feel like they can't be sued and they can't be regulated at all, there is no downside. That's a pretty hard thing. That's the Wild Wild West.
Right.
And that's what we have now.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I've had conversations with a number of trial lawyers. I think it'd be a great catfight
That's their worst nightmare.
Well, I mean, you think about it. I mean, the left, the trial lawyers tend to line up on the left with the Democrats, but their ideology.
Where the money's at too.
I know.
I used to do trial work, and let me tell you, if you wanted to change this overnight, say you can make any decision you want to make. Section 230 is no longer the law of the land. You just got to answer to people if they sue you. It would change everything.
I agree 100%. Here's the question for you, Senator Graham, though. How do you get that done?
Well, you got to find bipartisanship, and here's what I think. I think there's growing bipartisanship around the idea of transparency, that looking how the algorithms work, that liberals and conservatives have different problems, but they have a common view that these platforms need to have some accountability they don't have today. And what I'd like to do is, if you're going to have liability protection, you have to earn it. That if you're not going to allow a parent to sue you because some sexual predator got on their website or into their system, then you got to prove that you did everything you could to stop them. So my goal is to incentivize them to do better. If you have liability protection, you have to earn it. And I want transparency into community standards, how the algorithms work.
Yeah. Senator, I think you are absolutely correct. I think you could save a lot of time for the government in terms of regulation if you just remove Section 230 and allow the trial lawyers to go after those deep pockets of big tech.
It would change everything overnight.
It would.
And maybe there's a middle ground where they have to earn their liability protections, but change is going to come. These platforms are just too powerful, and they have a lot of potential to wreak havoc on the country as well as enlighten the country. So we got to find that balance.
Well, and I'm actually one of those conservatives that actually likes some trial lawyers because I think they provide a service.
Well, they have in the past. They've held people accountable.
They have.
Need to be held accountable.
I think that. Well, one final question for you, Senator, and because we could do a whole program on this question I'm going to ask you, and we only got 2 minutes left. But we talk about liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat divide. Are we? I mean, what my 25 years, and you've been in this a little bit longer, but I see the two sides moving farther and farther apart.
Well, so there's elements in the Democratic Party that are destroying your grandparents' Democratic Party. Here's the odd thing. Donald Trump has brought the Republican Party together, whether you're a libertarian, sort of a national security type guy like me and you, no matter who you are, Chamber of Commerce type. Trump has been great on pro-life issues. He's been great for business. So the odd thing is that the Republican Party is more united today than I can remember.
Right.
The Democratic Party is about to fracture in 2 or 3 camps. And here's the question for Biden. If you want to find common ground on fixing a broken immigration system, dealing with Section 230, building roads, bridges, and highways and ports, I will meet you in the middle. But if the goal is to transform America like the Squad, no way. So
Yeah.
he's riding a wild tiger. And how he manages this is yet to be determined if he wins.
We'll be watching.